The Alpha King marked the girl who swore she'd never submit. She had said the words in front of 70 witnesses. I know that now, though I did not know it when I arrived at Vorkeep. I had not been to the High Moon Summit in 7 years. 7 years of borders to hold and a grief I was still learning to carry quietly. And the last thing I expected, riding into that clifftop meeting hall with the sea wind off the bluffs and the 3 northern packs assembled below the rafters, was to feel my wolf go so suddenly, completely still that I nearly stopped breathing. Vereth had been restless for a year. He paced in me at night. He lifted his great head at the edge of my awareness and looked east, toward nothing I could name, and the ache of it had become a kind of background weather, something I had learned to walk through without complaint. My counsel called it grief's last hold. My beta Orin called it a wolf who had been patient long enough. I called it nothing and kept riding. But when I stepped into the high hall at Vorkeep, with its stone walls open on the seaside and its long tables set for the 3-pack welcome feast, and I saw her, my wolf was not restless anymore. She stood at the far end of the hall with 2 other sentinel watches, in the gray and iron colors of Vorkeep's border guard, her dark hair pulled back hard against the salt wind that came through the open archway. She was not watching the arrival, she was checking the count of a weapons rack along the inner wall, her hand moving down the spears with a quiet efficiency that told me she had done it 100 times. Her back was straight, her jaw was set. She looked like a woman who had decided exactly what kind of life she intended to live and had built it, plank by plank, without asking anyone's permission. Vereth said, very quietly, in the place where his voice lived in my chest, "There." I did not move. I was standing in the entrance of the hall with my beta at my shoulder and 30 pairs of eyes turning toward me in welcome, and I could not move, because my wrist had begun to warm. I pressed my thumb over the inside of my left wrist, where the mate mark rests in all of us, dormant, waiting, the old moon gift that wakes only once. It was warm, not burning, not a fire, a warmth like the sea at low tide, moving in, certain and unhurried, as if the water had always known the shore was there. I walked in. I greeted the Vorkeep Alpha, a solid gray-templed man named Aldous, and his beta, and the visiting Alpha of Kalrun to the east. I said the correct things. I sat at the head table and drank the welcome cup and answered questions about the northern border I had ridden 3 days to attend this summit for. The whole time, my wrist was warm, and the whole time, she did not look at me once. Her name was Rena. I learned it from Aldous within the first hour, though I did not ask directly. I asked about the Sentinel program that guarded Vorkeep's clifftop approaches, because it was genuinely well designed, and I wanted to know who had built it, and Aldous told me that his Border Watch captain had reorganized the whole rotation 4 years ago. He said her name without any particular weight, the way you say the name of something that simply works, that has been reliable so long you no longer marvel at it. I nodded. I did not write it down. I did not need to. "She's the one who took the Sentinel oath," offered Orin at my elbow, low enough for only me. I had known him long enough that he could read when I was paying careful attention to something I was not looking at. He had probably noticed the moment we walked in, 3 years ago, before all the pack elders and the sea, swore to serve the pack as a free wolf, never bound to a mate claim. The Oath Keeper, they call her. I looked at him. "Some of them say it fondly," he added. "Some of them don't." I looked across the hall to where Rena was now directing one of her junior sentinels through the positioning of the evening watch posts, her hands sketching positions in the air with a brisk certainty. She moved like someone who had thought her way through every room before she entered it. The warmth in my wrist was not going away. I had heard of the Sentinel Oath before. It was old, older than the formal pack councils, older than the summit tradition. A wolf who swore it gave their full service to the collective good of the pack, their life and their watch and their labor, and in exchange they were released from the expectation of a mate bond. No claiming, no ceremony, free. It had been meant, in the old days, for wolves who had lost their mate to violence or sickness and could not bear the thought of another bond. Some packs still allowed it for other reasons. I had never thought much about it, as a practice. I thought about it now. She had made a public promise. 70 witnesses, the pack elders, the sea, the old words. And somewhere in the year before that oath, unknown to either of us, my wolf had begun to pace east. I did not know what to do with that. I was not a man who panicked, but I sat with my welcome cup and felt the weight of it settle. She had chosen, deliberately, openly, before every authority she recognized, and what I felt on my wrist said something different from what she had chosen. A lesser king might have pressed the matter that first night, announced the bond to the hall, let the mark make the argument for him, put her in a position she hadn't asked for in front of her own pack and 2 visiting ones. I was not going to do that. The summit ran 3 days. 3 days of border talks and trade agreements, and a long afternoon spent walking the clifftop wall with Aldous, looking down at the gray water breaking against the rocks below, discussing the pressure on the eastern timber routes. I kept my word to myself. I did not seek her out. I watched, as I always watched, and I learned. What I learned was this. Rena was not performing her oath. She was living it. She was the first one up and the last one down. She trained with the younger sentinels at the far end of the sea meadow in the early mornings before the formal sessions began, and she was harder on herself than on any of them. I saw her run the cliff path twice when the others ran it once, not to prove anything, just because she had set a standard and she kept it. She sat at the common table for meals, not the senior table where her rank would have placed her. She was not beloved in the showy way of leaders who give speeches. She was beloved the way that good weather is. You don't realize how much you depended on it until something unsettles it. On the first evening, she stopped a dispute between a call-run sentinel and one of Vorkeep's junior watchholders with 3 sentences and no raised voice, something that had apparently been simmering for half the day before she walked past and caught the tone of it. The 2 men came away from the exchange looking chastened but not humiliated. She moved on before either of them could thank her. I watched her go and thought, this is a woman who does not fix things for recognition. She fixes them because they need fixing. On the second morning, I was crossing the lower courtyard toward the session hall when I saw her at the gate post, down on one knee beside a young sentinel who had twisted his ankle on the path. She was checking the joint with careful hands, asking him questions in a low voice, and the young man was trying very hard not to look relieved. She found whatever she was looking for, said something that made him exhale, and told him to stay off the cliff route and take the inland post instead. He went, she stood. She brushed the gravel from her knee and walked to her next task without looking back. She didn't know I'd seen it, or perhaps she did. I had the feeling she was rarely unaware of who occupied a space, but she gave no sign. Verath was quiet in my chest, in a way I hadn't felt in a year. Not the restless pacing east, just still, present. The way a wolf is when it has found what it was looking for and is content to wait. I let myself admit, on the second morning, that the warmth in my wrist had not faded. I had half expected it to, half hoped it would resolve into something manageable, a mistake, an echo of old grief given false shape. But it was there when I woke, there when I moved through the corridors of Vorkeep's meeting hall, there when I sat across a table from Aldous and talked timber roots, while a part of my attention noted that she was on the far side of the courtyard, speaking with 2 of her sentinels over a drawn map of the approach roads. It occurred to me, watching her bend over that map, that I had never had to work to be still before. I was by nature a patient man. 11 years of ruling a difficult northern territory will cure a man of the habit of haste. But this kind of stillness, holding a truth very carefully and not letting it tip over, was different from patience. It was more like carrying a lamp in a wind and refusing to cup it, because cupping it was the thing she hadn't asked me to do. On the second evening, one of Vorkeep's senior women, I did not know her name, stopped beside me where I stood at the sea rail after the evening session, looking out at the water. She was perhaps 60, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, and she did not introduce herself before she spoke. "You've been watching her," she said. "I've been watching the sea approach," I said. "It's well fortified. I was wondering who chose the positioning." She did. The woman, whoever she was, looked at me with a kind of frank assessment that reminded me of my grandmother. "She's not going to make it easy for you." "I beg your pardon?" She nodded toward my left wrist, which I had kept carefully covered with my sleeve. "The summit's been running long enough that we know what a king looks like when he's trying to hold himself still." She tilted her head. I knew her mother, same set to the jaw, different reasons. She walked away before I could answer, and I stood there at the sea rail for a long time with the wind coming off the water and my wrist warm against my sleeve. I found a reason to speak to her on the third morning. A legitimate one. I am not a man who manufactures pretexts when the real one would serve. The eastern approach she had designed for Vorkeep included a ridge wall technique I had been considering for a section of my own northern border, and I wanted to know whether the sightline calculations had been done by a surveyor or worked out by eye. It was a genuine question. I waited until her sentinels had dispersed after the early morning training. She was cleaning a blade on the low stone bench at the edge of the sea meadow, the tall grass bending in the wind, and she looked up when I approached without any particular surprise on her face, as if she had already noted the angle of my approach and was simply waiting for me to arrive at it. "Alpha King," she said, "not my lord. Not a flinching deference. Just the title, level, and clean." "Captain," I said. "The ridge wall on the eastern approach. Whose calculation?" She looked at me for a moment with gray eyes that held more questions than she asked. Then she set down her cloth and her blade and said, "Mine. 63 paces between the first and second watch posts. The sight lines cross at the willow scrub line, so there's no blind reach." I noticed. The blind reach problem on a cliff edge approach is usually solved by adding a post, not by angling the existing ones. Something shifted in her expression. Not softened, exactly. Sharpened into a different shape, the way a blade changes when it's turned to a new light. "Most people add the post," she agreed. "Then they have 3 sentinels doing the work of 2, and 2 of them are cold and bored and prone to missing things. 3 cold sentinels with overlapping views are worse than 2 warm ones with clean sightlines," I said. "Yes." She looked at me directly. "What do you want, Alpha King?" I had walked out here with a genuine question about ridge walls, and I had asked it, and we had answered it, and she was right that there was something else beneath it. I decided I would not pretend otherwise. "To speak with you," I said, "about something I would rather not announce at the welcome table." Her gaze went to my wrist. I had not moved my sleeve. She looked back up. "You don't need to show me," she said, and her voice had gone very level, the way a person's voice goes when they are keeping it under control. "I know." I went still. 2 mornings ago," she said. She was looking out at the sea now, not at me. "Before the morning session, I was on the cliff path and I stopped because something felt like—" She stopped herself, exhaled. "I thought it was the drop in the weather. I know what it is now." I looked at her left wrist. Her sleeve was rolled for training and had not been pulled back down. The mate mark was faint, not yet fully awoken, the way it is before the bond is named, but it was there. A pale gold against the inside of her wrist, the shape of the old crescent, soft as breath. She saw me looking and pulled the sleeve down with a quick, deliberate motion. "I swore an oath," she said. "I know. 70 witnesses, the elders, the sea." She said it not as a plea but as a statement of record, as if she were laying evidence before a tribunal and wanted it noted. "I know," I said again. She looked at me, and nothing," I said. "I wanted you to know that I am aware of it. I am not here to press a claim on a woman who has already told the world what she chose." Something moved in her expression. Not relief, not quite, but something adjacent to it. As if she had been braced for a different conversation and was still deciding whether to believe this one. "Then what are you here for?" she asked. "I told you," I said. "Ridgewall sightlines." I looked out at the eastern approach. "And now to say, the mark is real. You know that too. I am not going to pretend it isn't, or make decisions for you about what it means, but I won't act as though it doesn't exist either." She was quiet for a long time, the wind moving through the tall grass between us. "My pack thinks I'm broken," she said, finally. Not with bitterness, with the flat matter-of-factness of someone who has long since decided what they think of other people's opinions. The women at the high table, the ones who've had their own bonds, they pity me, or they think I made a mistake and won't admit it. "Did you? Make a mistake?" "No, immediate, certain." Then a pause. "I don't know." She picked up her blade and her cloth again, not to escape the conversation but because her hands needed something to do. "I made it for good reasons. My reasons haven't changed. The world around the oath has." I said nothing, because there was nothing to say that wasn't hers to work out herself. After a moment, she said, without looking at me, "I need time." "You have it," I said. "I leave tomorrow morning. The summit closes tonight." She looked up at that. "That is not a pressure," I said. "The bond will keep. If you decide you want nothing to do with it, you have every right to say so, and I will honor it. Mate marks have been refused before. It's painful, but it's done. I held her gaze. You are not a territory to be claimed, Captain. You are a woman who made a promise to herself and her pack, and whatever comes next, it comes from a choice that is yours. She studied me for a long time with those careful gray eyes. Why are you telling me this? She said. Because it's true, I said, and because you deserve to hear it plainly. She was quiet again. The wind moved through the tall grass. Somewhere below the cliff, a gull called and fell silent. Most people who find out about the mark press, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact she was laying down, the way she laid all her facts. Carefully, in order, so she could look at them clearly. Even the ones who mean well, they start talking about destiny, about what the bond means for the pack, for the alliance, for the bloodline. They make it about everything except whether I want it. I know, I said. You're not doing that. No, I said, I'm not. Why not? She said. You're an alpha king. I'm a border watch captain from a pack that isn't even your territory. The practical arguments run entirely in your favor. The practical arguments are irrelevant, I said, if you haven't chosen them. A bond entered under pressure is no bond I want. I paused, and I've had enough of the world running on practical arguments. I have run my territory on them for 7 years. I know their weight and their limits. I met her eyes. Some things are not practical arguments. Some things are a woman who checked a weapons rack when everyone else was watching the door, and a wolf who went quiet for the first time in 12 months. She held my gaze. Her jaw was set, but it was the set of thinking, not of fighting. I need time, she said, again. You have it, I said. I leave tomorrow morning. The summit closes tonight. She looked at me. That is not a pressure, I said. The bond will keep. If you decide you want nothing to do with it, you have every right to say so, and I will honor it. Mate marks have been refused before. It's painful, but it's done. I held her gaze. You are not a territory to be claimed, Captain. You are a woman who made a promise to herself and her pack, and whatever comes next, it comes from a choice that is yours. She studied me for a long time with those careful gray eyes. Why are you telling me this? She said. Because it's true, I said. And because you deserve to hear it plainly. I left her there with the wind and the sea meadow and the pale mark on her wrist. My own wrist was warm all the way back to the hall. The closing feast was louder than the opening one, as they always are. 3 days of careful diplomacy softened by the relief that it was ending well, and the wine moved more freely. I sat at the high table and did my duties, and kept my expression in order, and tried not to track where she was in the room. I managed it for about an hour. She was at the common table, as she always was, with 2 of her sentinels, and an older woman I now recognized as her senior post holder. A solid woman with a scarred hand named Petra. They were not celebrating exactly. Rena did not have the look of a woman who celebrated, but there was a quiet ease to their table that felt earned. Oren was at my shoulder. She hasn't looked at you once, he said quietly. She's aware of everything in the room, I said. Including me. He was quiet a moment. The mark? Both of us. He exhaled. He had served me for 11 years and knew better than to offer advice I hadn't asked for. What he did was pour me more wine and say nothing, which was exactly right. It was nearly the end of the feast when it happened. I was watching the seaside archway, where the night had come fully in, the stars clear and hard over the water, when I heard her name said in a carrying tone from the far side of the hall. The Oath Keeper herself, a man's voice, not young, with the particular edge of someone who thinks they're being amusing. She'll deny it until she's in the ground. Dara, you know how she is. I saw it, said a woman's voice. Dara, lower but carrying the same note of a private joke made just public enough. On the cliff path this morning, she had her sleeve down, but I saw it, pale as a ghost and pretending it didn't exist. A pause, and then with a sweetness that wasn't sweet at all, the girl who swore she'd never submit. And look at her wrist now. The table nearest them had gone a little quiet. Not the whole hall, only the 20 or so people who could hear it clearly. I did not look at Rena. I was already watching from the corner of my attention. She had heard it. I could see that in the set of her shoulders. And I was deciding, very quickly, what to do. My first instinct was to speak. To name what I knew. To put the weight of my position between her and the cheap mockery of 2 people who were smaller than she was. To make it stop. And then I stopped myself, because she had not asked me for that. She had asked me for time. She had asked me for a choice. What I did was this. I set down my cup. I rose from the high table. The hall quieted as it always does when an alpha king stands, not because I commanded it, but because the old instinct runs deep in pack-born wolves. Aldous looked at me with a question in his eyes. I walked, unhurried, to the center of the hall. I did not walk toward Dara or toward the man beside her. I walked toward Rena's table. She looked up at me with those careful eyes, and I could see her trying to read what I was doing, whether I was about to do something she would have to manage. I stopped in front of her. I pulled back my left sleeve. The mate mark was fully awake on my wrist now. The old crescent, gold and clear, the way they look when both partners are in the same room, and I held it where the firelight caught it, where the hall could see it. Not a speech, not an announcement, just the truth made visible. The room had gone very still. Rena looked at my wrist. She looked at me. Her jaw was set exactly as it had been when I first saw her, but her hands were flat on the table, and the mark on her wrist, under the sleeve I could not see, was warm. I could feel it as certainly as I felt my own. "I'm not doing this to make a point," I said to her, quietly enough that it was for her and not the hall. "I told you, the choice is yours. I just don't intend to pretend it isn't real, on your behalf or anyone else's." The silence in the hall was complete. Rena was quiet for a long moment. She looked around, not at me, but at the hall, at the assembled pack elders in the summit seats, at Aldous, at Petra, at the two sentinels who had been eating beside her and were now watching her with something complicated on their faces. Then she looked back at me. "Sit down," she said. I blinked. "Sit down," she said again. Her voice was perfectly level. "The feast isn't over." Someone at a nearby table let out a breath of surprise. Oren, behind me, made a sound I could not fully interpret. I sat down, at her table, the common table, not the high one. Aldous watched me do it with wide eyes, and I thought I saw the ghost of a smile on his senior beta's face. Rena looked at the two people who had spoken, Dara and the man beside her, a senior tracker named Orton. I had placed the voice now, and said, in a tone like cold water, "This conversation is not about my wrist, and it is not for your amusement. Whatever you saw on the cliff path, you will keep to your own table." Orton opened his mouth. "I am still your senior sentinel," she said, "and the summit has not closed." He closed it. We sat at the common table for the last hour of the feast, Rena and I and her two sentinels, and old Petra, who poured wine with the composure of a woman who had long since stopped being surprised by anything the world put in front of her. The conversation was not about the mark. We talked about the summit, and the Eastern Timber Agreement, and a particular problem with the cliff path drainage that Rena had been petitioning Aldous about for 2 seasons. I had opinions about drainage. She had better ones. We disagreed about the placement of the secondary runoff channel, and she was right, and I told her so, which seemed to surprise her. When the feast ended and the hall began to empty in small clusters, Petra took the 2 young sentinels away with a hand gesture and a look that required no words, and Rena and I were left at the table with the candles burning down and the sea coming through the archway, dark and steady. She sat for a long time with her cup and looked at the middle distance. I waited. "I made the oath because I believed it," she said at last. "I want you to understand that. It wasn't pain. My last pack match had fallen apart before it became a bond. The man was good enough, just not right, and we both knew it. I wasn't running from anything. I looked at what I wanted my life to be, and the oath fit it." "I believe you," I said. "It still fits," she said. "The watch, the work, the free wolf part of it." She looked at the archway, the dark sea. What I told myself was that the rest of it, the bond, the claiming, was a thing people wanted because they needed a name for something they couldn't carry alone. I was fine. I didn't need it. She paused. "I didn't know what I didn't know," she said. I did not rush to fill the silence. "The morning on the cliff path," she said. "When I stopped, it wasn't like pain or fire or anything I'd been told to expect. It was..." She looked at her left wrist. "It was like setting something down I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten I was carrying it." She frowned at that, as if it wasn't quite the right description. "I don't know how to explain it." "You don't have to," I said. She looked at me then, sharply. "I mean that," I said. "You don't owe me an explanation for anything." "What do you owe me?" she said, and it was a real question, not a challenge. I thought about it. "Honesty," I said. "The same as I'd want. I am not going to tell you the bond overrides everything you chose. It doesn't work that way in my territory, and it shouldn't. What I can tell you is that Verith has been restless for a year, facing east, and when I walked into this hall 2 days ago, he went still for the first time in 12 months. I paused, and that I have spent 2 days not pressing this, and I would spend 2 years if that's what it took, because I would rather wait than take something from you." She was very still across from me. "You bowed," she said, "at the hall, when you stood." I didn't know what she meant for a moment. Then I did. When I had risen and crossed to her table and shown the mark, I had inclined my head, without thinking. The small formality, not a king's nod to a subject, but something else, something older. An acknowledgement. "You bowed," she said again, quietly. "To me, in front of the summit." "Yes." "Why?" "Because you had already submitted yourself to something harder than any claiming," I said. 3 years of an oath made in good faith, kept in full, before your whole pack in the sea. Because the word submit has gotten confused with the wrong thing. I met her eyes. "What you did when you made that oath wasn't weakness, and what I'm asking you to consider isn't the thing you were refusing when you made it." She looked at me for a long time. "What are you asking me to consider?" she said. "A different kind of bond," I said. "One that doesn't ask you to stop being what you are." She asked me to wait. Not the abstract wait I had offered on the sea meadow. She meant that night, at that table, in that hall, while the candles burned down and the sea came in and out below the cliff top. So I waited. She was still in the way of people who think with their whole body, who are genuinely processing something and not performing it. Her hands were loose on the table. She looked at the archway, the stars, the last guttering candles at the ends of the long table. Twice she turned her left wrist over and looked at it, and then turned it back down. Once Oren appeared in the doorway of the hall, and I made a small gesture with my hand, and he withdrew again. Twice, a junior Vorkeep sentinel passed through and pretended very hard not to notice us, with the particular studied blankness of someone who very much noticed us. She asked, without looking up, "Does it ever go away? The pacing, the restlessness." She was not asking about her own experience. She was asking about Verith. "A year," I said, "facing east. Some nights it kept me awake." "And now?" "Still," I said, "completely still. The way he is in deep sleep, when we are far from trouble and there is nothing he needs to protect." She absorbed this. Mine has been, I don't know the word for it, certain. A certainty I didn't feel before, about something I hadn't decided yet. She frowned slightly at the candle nearest her. "I don't generally feel certain about undecided things. It was disorienting." "For me it was disorienting to feel it stop," I said. "The pacing. I had almost gotten used to it." "Almost," she said. "Almost." She was quiet again for a while. The candle guttered in a wind gust from the archway, and she put her hand around it without thinking, shielding it until the flame settled, and then took her hand away. Such a small, instinctive thing. I had no particular reason to find it striking, and yet I did. After a long time, long enough that the sea wind had shifted to the colder current that comes in after midnight, she said, "I need to release the oath before anything else." "Of course," I said. "Not because it was wrong," she said, "because it's not the right shape anymore." She looked at me steadily. "If I release it, that's my choice. It has nothing to do with a claim." "Yes," I said. "And you're not going to tell anyone, that's why." "No," I said. "Your reasons are yours." She was quiet again. Then she stood, and I stood with her, and she walked to the seaside archway and stood at the edge of it, looking out at the dark water. I stood a few paces behind her. She said the words of the sentinel oath release very quietly, in the old form. I had not expected that. I had thought it would take days, a formal gathering, the elders convened. But she told me later that the old form only required the wolf who made it to speak it freely, without compulsion, with the sea as witness. That was how she'd taken it. That was how she gave it back. When she turned around, something was different in her face. Not softer, more open maybe, as if a door had been held carefully nearly shut for a long time, and she had simply decided to let it stand. "All right," she said. I waited. She held out her left wrist. She had pushed the sleeve back and the mark was there. Fully awake now, gold and clear. The crescent steady on the inside of her wrist. "I'm told this is the part where you cover it," she said. "Your hand over the mark." "Yes," I said, "but only when you want it." She looked at me. Then she looked at the mark. Then she said, very quietly, "Cairn." It was the first time she had said my name, not the title, my name. I stepped forward and wrapped my hand gently over her wrist, over the mark, and the warmth that had lived in my own wrist for 2 days moved like a tide reaching its shore. Certain, unhurried, entirely inevitable, and the bond settled between us like something that had been waiting a long time to simply be allowed. She exhaled, a long, careful breath. "That's not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "Something more dramatic," she said. She looked down at where my hand still rested over her wrist. "Fire, thunder, the whole pack watching." "The whole pack is asleep," I said. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close. We stood at the archway for a while, in the cold sea wind, and talked the way people talk when they have just made a decision that will change everything and are still finding the shape of it. Not declarations, not plans, just the ordinary conversation of two people who are getting to know each other, with the sea below and the stars above, and the hall empty behind us. She asked about Vereth. I told her about the restless year, the pacing east, the first morning at the summit when he went still. She listened the way she did everything, with full attention, head slightly tilted, processing. She told me about the cliff path morning, the feeling of setting something down, how she'd gone back to the watch rotation schedule afterward, and stared at it for an hour, and couldn't focus on a single line. "That's never happened to me before," she said. "I can always focus." "I know the feeling," I said. I couldn't remember the timber root figures at the afternoon session. I've known them for 7 years. She did smile at that, briefly. "I noticed you pausing. You were paying attention?" "I was not paying attention," she said, with precision. "I was aware of the room. I am always aware of the room. And I was in the room." "Yes," she said, simply. "You were in the room." In the morning, before the summit formally closed, Rena stood before the pack elders, Vorkeep's 4, and the visiting elders of Kalrun, and released the sentinel oath in the full formal manner, with witnesses. She did it cleanly and without ceremony, the way she did most things. She said it was not a defeat. She said the oath had served the purpose she had taken it for, and she was releasing it now of her own will, for her own reasons, and she would thank everyone to understand that those reasons were not an apology. Elder Sutton, a lean older woman who had said, I was told, many times that some wolves were simply not made for a mate, sat in the first seat and watched with an expression that went from cool neutrality to something I can only describe as reluctant reassessment. Dara, 2 seats back, said nothing. She was looking at her hands. Orton, beside her, was looking at the floor. When Rena was done, she turned and looked at me across the room, once, brief and clear-eyed. Not for approval, just present, including me in something she was nonetheless doing entirely for herself. I think I have been waiting for that look, without knowing it, for a long time. After the formal closure, Aldous clasped my arm and told me I was welcome at Vorkeep any season, which he meant both as alpha to alpha and as something warmer. His senior beta, Petra, shook my hand and said, "She will keep you honest," with a look that made it clear she considered this an excellent outcome for everyone. Orin brought the horses and said nothing, which was all the comment I needed from him. Rena rode with us for the first mile out of Vorkeep, just her, on a gray horse, her sentinel colors still on, to where the cliff road turned inland and became the broad northern track that would take me home. Orin rode ahead with the rest of the party, at a distance that was absolutely not a coincidence. He had the good grace to look absorbed in the middle distance. We stopped at the turn. The sea was below on our left, the gray morning light coming over it, and the cliff-top grasses bending in the steady wind. "The drainage runoff," she said. "On the secondary channel, I still think my angle is correct." "I think you're right," I said, though I intend to look at the gradient again when I'm not calculating it next to someone I was trying not to be obvious about. She looked at me. "Were you obvious?" Orin noticed immediately. "He seems observant," she said. "He's been at my shoulder for 11 years," I said. "He notices everything." "What does he think?" She said. It was a real question, She was not performing indifference about it. "He thinks I should be worthy of whatever you decide," I said. He didn't say that in those words. He said it by not offering his opinion when he very easily could have. She nodded slowly, as if this made sense to her. "Good," she said. She looked out at the sea for a moment, and her face had the quality it always had, thinking, reading something in the middle distance, not yet done. "My pack knows now," she said, "that I released the oath. They'll wonder why." "What will you tell them?" "The truth," she said, "that the reasons I had 3 years ago have given way to different reasons. That none of the things I believed when I made the oath have turned out to be wrong. Exactly. I just found out there were things I hadn't thought to believe in yet." I looked at her. "That's the truth," she said, "or as close as I can get to it this morning." "It's honest," I said. "I'm always honest," she said. "It's simpler, less to keep track of." A gull went over, riding the updraft off the cliff top, and I watched it for a moment before looking back at her. "Will Dara and Orton make trouble for you?" I asked. She considered this as the clear-eyed question it was. Not a royal concern about territory or alliance, but a question about her life in the place where she lived it. "Orton will find something else to occupy himself with within a fortnight," she said. "He's that kind of man. Dara is sharper and holds things longer, but she'll hold it quietly. She won't want to look like she was wrong." A pause. "I've worked with both of them for 4 years. I know their shape." "And Elder Sutton?" Rena's mouth shifted. Just slightly. The ghost of something wry. "Sutton will come around," she said. "She respects results. Give her a season to watch, how the watch runs, and she'll update her thinking. She always does." She paused. I think she meant it well, what she said, that some wolves aren't made for a mate. She was speaking from her own experience, not mine. I couldn't know that when I made the oath. "No," I said, "you couldn't." She was quiet a moment, looking out at the sea. "I don't know what this looks like," she said. "The bond, the practical shape of it. I won't give up the watch. I won't give up Vorkeep." "I'm not asking you to," I said. "I don't fully know the practical shape of it either. We'll work it out." "Just like that?" "It won't be simple," I said. "But yes, we'll work it out." She considered this. "The ride from Vorkeep to your northern border is 3 days. 2.5, if the eastern pass is clear. It won't be, in another month." "No, but the sea road holds longer." She was looking at me as if she were surveying approach angles, calculating, honest, taking in all the distance. 3 days is a long way to go to argue about drainage channels," she said. "It is," I agreed, "though I expect the arguments will be worth it." The corner of her mouth moved. More than a ghost, this time. A real thing, small and specific, hers alone. She reached out and held her left wrist toward me. Not the formal presenting gesture, just offering it. Plain and unadorned, the way she offered everything. The mark was gold and clear in the morning light. I wrapped my hand around her wrist. The warmth moved between us, steady as the tide coming in. Not the dramatic fire I had expected when I was younger, and hadn't yet learned what it actually felt like, but something deeper. The certainty of something that was always going to arrive, finally arriving. "Cairn," she said. "Rena," I said. We stayed like that for a moment with the sea below and the road stretching ahead of both of us. Hers back to the cliff top and her sentinels, mine north to the keep and the border and everything that waited, and the bond warm and certain between our hands. The gray morning light was on her face, and there was nothing anxious in it, only the same steady, open quality I had seen last night when she released the oath. A door held closed for good reasons, now standing wide. Then she took her hand back. She gathered her reins and turned her horse, and looked at me once more over her shoulder. "I'll send word," she said, "when the East Pass clears." "I'll be watching for it," I said. She nodded once, precise and clean, and rode back up the road toward the sea. I watched her go until the gray horse crested the cliff top and disappeared against the sky, her straight back the last thing to vanish into the wind and the light. Oren brought his horse alongside mine. He said nothing. He had the particular quality, in those moments, of being entirely unreadable while actually feeling something quite warm. "Say it," I said. 3 days is a long ride to argue about drainage channels," he said. "That's what she said." "Good," he said. "She sounds like someone worth the ride." Verath was still in my chest, in the deep, contented way of a wolf that has finally come home. Not the stillness of sleep, but of rest. The difference between a wolf who has stopped pacing because it is tired, and a wolf who has stopped pacing because it has found the thing it was pacing toward, and is simply, quietly, content. I turned north, and rode.